Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching from. Welcome to the LinkedIn Live Lunch Hour. And I am super excited to be here. Happy Tuesday to everybody. Hope your week is off to a good start. So I have got a great guest on the show today. His name is Kamal Webster, and I met Kamal actually on the Job Seeker Hotline show, which we did up through the end of July, and he showed up all the time. And when I say all the time, he showed up on the last day, which was great. No, he had been introduced by a mutual friend of ours to come and check it out, and I'm so glad that we did. And he and I have had a couple of conversations prior to this, and once we did talk and we started talking about diversity and equity inclusion, I really thought he'd be a great guest, and so that's why I brought him on. So Kamal is a DEI thought leader, change agent. He works with organizations. Right now, he is furloughed with an organization, so he is definitely open for new gigs and opportunities until his former employer brings him back. But his focus has been over healthcare. He's worked for Henry Ford Healthcare. He's worked for MICPA. He's worked for the Alliance. So everybody say hello to my guest and friend, Kamal Webster. Good afternoon, Kamal. How are you?
I am well, Michael. Thank you for having me, my friend. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So you're based in Detroit, right?
I am, Detroit, Michigan. It's a little warm here for Detroit because, as you guys know, we get some really, really cold winters. But it's definitely summertime up in Detroit right now.
That it is. Well, it's hard to believe that we're already in. We're coming on September 1st, a week from today, and it blows my mind that even though we've been, most of us have been, in our homes for the last 6 months now, 5-6 months, that here we are in the calendar, yet it keeps moving, it keeps advancing, doesn't it?
Yeah, the time keeps going, man. And, I first started kind of calling this the lost summer based on everything that's going on. But I think, the way that we're all making a significant pivot in our careers, in our lives, in our mindset, this is really the found summer. I mean, I'm finding things out about myself and pushing forward in a way that I never could have imagined doing a few years ago. So, we're moving ahead, man.
Tell us what those things are. What have you discovered about yourself? I think the audience would love to hear it.
Well, I've discovered that in the consultant space and in the independent space, there's really a need for thought leaders who are very serious about DEI work. There were opportunities to be DEI consultants attached to organizations or hired through organizations in years prior. But I think with the focus on this particular work and the need for it, there's a bigger opportunity for consultants such as myself to do it independently and to contract themselves with certain organizations to help them change their culture. So it's a good time for that right now.
Absolutely. So we got people saying hello to you. Chandra Thomas says hello. Stephanie Owens, Philip Konecki, thank you all for joining us this morning. So
absolutely.
Well, my morning, your afternoon, everybody. Some very similar. So
yes.
So you've hit on the topic that I think everyone has been. It's the topic of the summer besides COVID, and that is diversity, equity, inclusion. We had, while we always knew that the problem was still there, George Floyd and the terrible incident that he went through, and some of the folks that went before him and now after him, including the young man in Wisconsin. I believe his name was Jacob Blake, or is Jacob Blake? He's still alive, thank goodness. But
yes, sir.
I think the latest I heard today is he's actually paralyzed now from the waist down because they shot him so many times.
Yeah.
And did you ever imagine that this, while you knew it was an issue, right? Did you ever imagine it would escalate to where it is today? Or do you think we're just way too late in the game?
Well, that's a great question. I think that as an African American male, this is the possibility of my reality daily. So none of this is necessarily new um, to individuals such as myself. Now, what I am surprised about and also encouraged by is the response to it, the worldwide response to the systemic racism and the police brutality that's been around for centuries. Never could have imagined that the world would respond in this manner on both sides of the aisle, in all races and all cultures and all backgrounds and communities. So I am encouraged by that. The thing that is discouraging, though, is the fact that in the midst of all of this public light on these situations, then here we go again with Mr. Jacob Blake, another person shot in the back, so it's almost never ending and it is discouraging. There's a tendency to think that we've come such a long way, but, I don't think we've actually come that far. We still have a long way to go.
Unfortunately, I agree. Unfortunately, I agree with you. I think we're just so far away from finding out when will this end? And part of us would like to think that it may end, in a certain election. Some of us, it's just hard to tell. But I mean, we had the same things happening, even in prior presidencies where people were just committing these useless, violent acts of racism and police brutality, etc. When you go into organizations,
Mm-hmm.
what are the first questions that you like to ask to really figure out? All right, is this for real, or is this just kind of a program that they want to do?
Well, I think that really one of the first things that you need to get to is the organization making a real commitment to it? And by real commitment, I mean there are several layers and several pillars of any DEI program that has to have its own individual strategy built out for it in order for it to even be halfway successful. So, it can't be, we're going to change part of the mission statement. It can't be, this is an initiative, or we're going to have, Cultural Awareness Day where everyone brings, their favorite cultural dish to the potluck. It's funny. And I've seen that, and all of those things are great. But I think that you have to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion holistically. And you have to look at it as a significant cultural transformation. This isn't just a cultural pillar. This isn't just something that you pop into your current culture. You have to build something that's going to totally transform the culture and make everyone feel welcome and like they belong. That takes time. That takes strategy. That takes money. And that takes a real commitment. So my first question is always, to the C-suite, are you really serious about this? Are you willing to put in the time and the sweat equity into making sure that this is a success? Once they say yes, because they always say yes, then I start to kind of basically rattle down the pillars of what that might take. And then their eyes kind of go big and they say, wow, I didn't know it took that much. It's a lot and it's very, very deep. And you're trying to right the wrongs of a situation that was created centuries and centuries and centuries ago and has been promoted throughout all of this time. So you're not going to just be able to put a Band-Aid on it and put a nice PR statement together and think that it's going to fix itself.
Right. Because it's not.
No.
I'd stumbled upon an article by Josh Person, who obviously, for those of you who don't know, Josh created his own group, but he used to be a part of Deloitte. Deloitte may own his company. I don't think that
Mm.
he's spun off. I think he's still a part of Deloitte, if my memory serves correctly. But he wrote an article that I'll share later with everybody. But it's Chief Diversity Officer, the toughest job in the business, and he brings up several points here. And so I'd like to kind of go through those points with you and kind of get your thoughts and offer advice on how you go into this thing, how you go into DEI. So the first point he makes is diversity is a management strategy, not an HR program. And I wholeheartedly agree. It is. Is it a management strategy, or is it more a business strategy than a management strategy, or is it both?
I think it's all of the above. I think it is a significant cultural awakening process and result structure. So when you put it in that context, it takes over and it permeates everything. So with it being in HR historically, it kind of gets lost because HR has, as all HR departments do, 110 things to do on their list per day. So implementing this into the culture and pushing this as an initiative and as pretty much a lifestyle for its team members, who has time to do that? So I think it is more of it is a management strategy, but it should be a strategy from the C-suite on down. And that's where the commitment has to come from. And that's where it has to start. And the planning has to start there. And as you start to bring in certain thought leaders and certain tastemakers from your staff to help you kind of craft this new lifestyle for your organization, then that's when you start to get to some of the real meat of what needs to change.
Absolutely. It's interesting. He says, given the business need, the chief diversity officer cannot be a solution to diversity, but rather the lightning rod program leader and strategist working with the management team. So, I can totally see it. He goes, so if you hire a CDO and you ask him or her to make the company more diverse, you're putting them in a very difficult situation. I couldn't agree more, right? Because what does that mean? And that's not how you create diversity within an organization, right? You don't go make it more diverse, or you don't tell recruiting, okay, we need to see at least one diverse candidate in the slot. And while that has good intention, it's almost like it feels forced, doesn't it?
Well, that's only one small part of it. Making an organization more diverse, that's the easy part. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit. You can recruit more, diverse employees into your workforce, but does that mean that they're going to feel comfortable there? Does that mean that you're going to be able to retain those employees? And I think much of DEI, at least the initial audit of your staff and your workforce, involves finding out how they feel. And I know, and when I do consulting, I use that word feel a lot because, there isn't often room for those feelings and for us to start talking about these feelings when you're talking about business strategies and results and bottom lines. But if your employees feel a certain way, or if they don't feel a certain way, such as welcome and belong and a sense of belonging, then that's going to ultimately affect how long they stay, how they perform, and what kind of reputation your company is going to have. So it does indeed have business implications. But diversity is the easy part. You can hire, African Americans and diversify your workforce. But what are your processes? How do they feel when they come to work? Do they feel they have a sense of belonging? Do they feel they have a stake in what's going on inside the company? That's where the real meat is. And that's kind of where a lot of organizations have to get to.
Yeah. When you look at like vendor, diversity vendor programs, I think that's definitely a good start. Setting up your money in a Black-owned bank is another way, right?
Yes.
I've heard Torrin Ellis talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's one of the things that I'm looking into right now because I fully embrace it and believe it. I mean, look, you can bank with the big banks all you want, but let's there are plenty of great Black businesses, including banks, financial consultants,
Hmm.
you know, benefit partner. You know, you can go through the whole list, right?
Sure.
I think it's and people go, well, where do you find those? Well, I don't know. I've heard of this thing called Google, and when I Googled like Black-owned banks, I mean, I got a huge list, more than
Yes.
I would have ever thought that existed out there,
Yes.
right? And I think that's where it's the investment. It's to show the commitment that you are wanting to not just hire people of color, but to also do business with people of color, regardless of race, because everybody is, those same banks are still backed by the FDIC. There's nothing different with it. It's just the owner and board of directors are predominantly Black,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so there's as much risk putting your money into Chase as there is with a Black-owned bank. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a great point that you bring up. I kind of put together this 7-point framework for true DEI success in organizations. And suppliers and vendors, that's one of the pillars. That's part of the framework. But it goes back to, are you making a real commitment as an organization, as a CEO? The statement that you put out after Mr. George Floyd was killed, you know, what are you doing to further that? What are you doing to stick to that? Was it just a PR statement for PR's sake, or are you really trying to change the world and change societies? And I believe that that's part of the exchange for being an organization that actually gives a service or sells something. I think that corporate responsibility, which is another pillar in the framework, I think you have to pay attention to that and you have to do something to further that particular part of your mission. Suppliers and vendors, that's a fantastic point. I love that. And I think that's how you get deep into this work and start making some real change.
Absolutely. I kind of think back. Remember when sustainability and recycling, it was all the rage. What was that?
Yes.
15 years
Sure.
ago, 20 years ago,
Sure. Hmm.
because we care about the environment. Well, if companies would just put 50% of that excitement and effort and passion that they had from sustainability into hiring Black executives, into doing business with different vendors, Black-owned businesses, I think we'd be in a lot better place. But it's just like, and the excuse I always heard was, well, and this is when I was working with Freeman and American Heart Association.
Hmm.
We just don't have enough, Black people entering the business, and we really want you to go out and do that. Okay, well, that's great. I can go out and do that, but I can't. What about providing them with training opportunities and learning opportunities, sponsoring a college program on nonprofit management or on events and conferences management at HBCUs, right? That's where
Sure.
you make the difference. A lot of people go, oh, we're going to go to, because I guarantee you're going to see a spike in HBCU hiring this year like
Hmm.
they've never
Hmm.
seen before. But
Yes.
what they don't realize is it takes a lot more. You still have to groom these folks for leadership. You should have uh, Black executives or management potential and management trainees in your high potential programs, right?
Yes.
Uh, you know,
You
so
have to essentially build your own pipeline into the community. I know that, corporations don't necessarily think that way. But I tell you who has kind of a perfect model for something like that, and they can essentially do the same thing. It's a totally different um, industry, but follow me here for a second. So, are you a sports guy at all?
Sure.
Are you
Go
an NBA
Mavs, go
guy?
Stars. Go
Yeah,
Mavs.
you absolutely go Mavs. They're doing
Right.
it. So you're familiar with AAU?
Oh, I swam AAU.
Did
Absolutely.
you? Okay,
Yeah, long time ago. But
so think about how AAU, how they recruit and how they will go and find high potentials all the way in middle school. Think about how they groom those athletes so they create that brand loyalty all the way up until they're in the NBA. Now, some people might say, well, that's totally different. It doesn't have to be. If someone builds that, if they make a real commitment to say, you know what, we're going to we're going to go to this middle school, and there's some kids who are interested in math, and they're stars in math, and in high school, they're stars in math. We're going to build a pipeline to bring more CPAs into, because that is an industry that's suffering from a lack of diversity and a lack of diverse candidates entering that pipeline and that career choice. We're going to start grooming these high schoolers, and we're going to start piquing their interest in this field of study. And then we're going to create a co-op program that they can come to our organization and, work and learn and make connections and contacts. So when it's time for them to get out of college, they know us, they love us, and they're loyal to this particular brand. Why can't that work in corporate America? I don't understand. I don't understand why that's not something that many organizations have explored. Some organizations are doing great. They have co-op programs, but
sure.
really focusing on that brand loyalty.
Well, I think you'll start to see that, and I think that's probably a good sell point for you, that when you're talking with these organizations, is to have that, to have people come into the bench, you groom them, you train them, so that when they're ready for their first management or even executive level position,
Sure,
got the tools to be successful.
100%.
I think that's a major part of a good DEI. I don't even want to call it a program. What should we be calling it? I want to call it a program, but I don't want to call it. It's a program has an end to it.
I'm calling it a
And
lifestyle now because it
I like that.
intersects corporate, it intersects life, it intersects home, and it's all kind of linked in together. I call it a lifestyle, and that's really my approach to it.
Yeah. By the way, so I've got some questions here.
Yes.
First, our mutual friend here, Miss Tara.
Tara's great.
Always, she is
That's
great.
that.
Always bringing the best.
Yes.
So here's one from a gentleman out of Dallas. I know Chuck. He says, "Do you ever weave religion into your presentations? What's what, is it? Is religion pertinent at this point?
In terms of diversity?
Yeah.
Oh, most certainly is. It most certainly is, because it is part of our lifestyle. And there are some organizations who do allow certain prayer times for individuals who are Muslims and things like that in a separate space. So it has to just be done strategically, and it has to be done the right way, because it is super important to people. So anything that's important to your employees, broad based, it most certainly should and can be part of this lifestyle and this culture change that you're building for your organization. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I knew that. I just wanted to feed you that.
Sure.
So my thought is this: is that people talk about diversity only in terms of color, but you bring up a good point. Diversity is about diversity of thought too. You want companies to bring many different thoughts and their backgrounds and their cultures and their religions and ethnicities to the table. To me, that's when you've kind of reached self-actualization on diversity. Is everybody is thinking like that and considering one another and being respectful of one another. What's your take on that?
Yes, diversity of thought is super important. I think that we have a long way to go with that, because even defining what that looks like and creating a process and behaviors around that, I don't think many organizations have done that, nor have many consultants done that. So we have a lot more work and a lot more research to do in terms of what that could look like and how we successfully implement that into a culture. But essentially, when you talk about diversity of thought, when you talk about religion, when you talk about race and customs and all of that, that's essentially allowing someone to bring their entire selves to work. And we hear that term so much, and we hear it all the time. But
the full person, right? To bring
the full person, exactly. Which is so important. So as we go through putting together this work, and as we go through advising organizations on how to do that, we have to include all of that. But we have to build a sustainable, succinct process, behavior, communications, everything that goes to that particular program or lifestyle. We have to build that so it's going to be successful and it's going to make people feel a certain way when they come to work.
Definitely. So, Edward Lim, diversity, awareness, and knowledge have to start from the top of the organization, where it may be board of directors, C-suite. It's initiative mindset that has to be collaboratively implemented. What's your thoughts on that?
100%. I mean, those are the decision makers. Those are the people essentially driving the ship. Those are what we call leaders. And when you're talking about a leadership and, our desire or our natural inclination to follow leaders, where are they leading us to? If they're the decision makers, those are the ones that should push for that inclusion, or that, environment that provides that full equity experience. So it has to start from the top. And you have to remember, these are the people who are also controlling the money, because this lifestyle, this culture shift, it costs. And what I mean by that, even just starting out, if you are bringing on a chief diversity officer, but you're not providing them, one, with the salary that matches their skill set and the work that they have to do. Okay, super important to keep them there. Secondly, you have to provide them with enough bodies to pull this off, because this is deep work and it is significant and it is overwhelming, to be honest. So you have to provide them with a staff that can actually facilitate the work. Because what happens is a lot of chief diversity officers, they take on this big project because they'll get brought on and they'll say, we have this big framework and we need to change our culture. And it'll be the chief diversity officer and maybe an admin, or maybe a couple of people who are expected to make this extreme pivot for a company that has not necessarily been doing any of this work over the past, 50 years since they've opened. And the chief diversity officer gets burned out a lot of times. So they need staff, and they need resources, and they need time, and they need help. So that all of those decisions and all of that funding essentially should come from the C-suite. It has to, because they're the ones who control that.
Yep. So the second point that Josh makes in his article, he says diversity and Black Lives Matter are different, and I would agree. I think they're extremely different.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts about that statement?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So
what he's saying is diversity is not the same as Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
Black Lives Matter is a totally separate problem around just with the shootings, the killings, the things, the bad things that are happening to young Black men and women, or Black men and women in general.
Sure.
Diversity, well, a part of it, it's not the same thing. Would you agree with that? Those are two totally separate issues.
Oh, I totally agree with that. But solving these diversity issues in the workplace can get us a little closer to people and organizations understanding that Black Lives Matter. They're two totally different things, but they are linked.
Absolutely. He also says, there's good consensus that diversity training is not enough, and I think diversity training is kind of a sham. Sensitivity training. I'm even one about the different affinity groups that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it creates more. I think it creates more silos than breaks down the barriers, because those aren't very open to inviting. So you follow what I'm saying. People aren't going to
I
show
do.
up. Black people aren't going to show up to Hispanic affinity groups or pride groups, or and vice versa. What are your thoughts on diversity training and on these affinity groups?
Again, diversity training is great, but it's one piece. And so many organizations that I've worked with and that I've seen think that that is the solution. Um, diversity training
Far
is
from it.
one small piece. And let me just quickly, if you don't mind, just go over kind of the 7 pillars, because we've talked
Please.
about a few of them.
Yeah.
And that's just really to display that all of these are important, but none of them stand alone. So the first one is commitment, that we talked about, and communication. Communication meaning, I think you should have your public statement, and I think you should have a deeper, more personal, private statement for your employees. Okay? Communication and commitment. That's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is data and analytics. You can't do any of this work successfully without data, without assessing where people are, without finding out how many, employees of color and diverse individuals do you recruit and do you hire, and how many stay. You have to figure all of that out through data and analytics. Training, important part of it, because you have to level set your employees for what this new culture is going to look like. Okay, you have to give them an opportunity to get this information and to teach them how to apply this. The next pillar is representation and recruitment. For me, one of the most, significant things about an organization that makes me feel welcome is to see people like me represented in the C-suite and in management and in director roles. Okay. Suppliers and vendors, we talked about, super important. Company branding and promo. I have to see myself in company branding and promo. That's going to make me feel a certain way as an employee. And then last but not least, your corporate social responsibility. What are you doing inside these walls? But what are you doing out in the community? All of these pillars require their own separate strategy for real diversity, equity, and inclusion transformation in your organization. So all of these are important. None of them can stand alone.
No, not at all. And I appreciate you sharing those 7 pillars. And I've not heard that put in that format before. So this is great.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up one of the last points is I need to see myself, online. I need to see, if I go to the career site, or, I want to see, a Black man in a leadership position. A lot of times though, is the companies are just going to put these stock photos up there, and that just, you can see right through that. I think companies need to do a better job of putting actual faces of actual employees, diverse employees, on their site, and to your point, featuring them in leadership positions.
Yes,
right? Because it does say a lot. And on the analytics side, what are some of the analytics that HR recruiting folks should be paying attention to outside of affirmative action? Affirmative action is just a report, and I fully believe in it and fully support it. But there's better analytics out there than just your affirmative action. Just tells you the truth, right?
Yeah.
And so do these other reports. But how can researchers, now they're called sourcers, or sourcers, now they're called researchers in recruiting, or even in the competitive research or market research, what are some of the analytics that these companies should be focusing on to drive the people analytics of the business?
Well, I think, like I mentioned before, one of them is retention.
Right.
If you numbers can lie on occasion. So, if you're putting out your annual report and you're saying, hey, we hired 40% African American employee base. But in less than a year, 30% of them or 50% of them left and chose to go to another company. That doesn't really tell the whole story. So I think that, when you have to talk about retention, you can talk about recruitment, but you also have to talk about retention. You have to also do focus groups to kind of gauge how people feel and why they feel that way. This is all great information that numbers aren't necessarily going to tell you, but you have to kind of get that qualitative data as well to kind of start coding and interpreting some of the responses that you get. So it's things like that, putting out a survey about, do I feel like I belong? And kind of getting the numbers on that, things like that.
Employee engagement surveys should start including questions in more detail around that to give them the idea. It's just the companies need to be prepared to act upon those if the numbers are below the quote unquote norm, right?
100%. And you have to find out, you have to also get data on, how many employees of color are in leadership positions. When is the last time you promoted an employee of color? So all of this information essentially will tell you a story. It will tell you about what's going on at your organization and where you need to kind of start building some strategy and some recruitment strategies for.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, well, this has been a great conversation. Unfortunately, we need to start wrapping things up. So I know people can find you on LinkedIn. Is there a website that people can go to if they want to engage your services?
They can just email me directly at kamal.webster@gmail.com. We can have a conversation.
Kamal.webster?
Kamal.webster@gmail.com. And, the advice that I want to give to, decision makers out there is a lot of us are just starting. A lot of organizations are just starting this work. So give yourself some leeway. Be patient. All of this takes time, and get some help. Recruit people in to help you figure this thing out, because you can't always do it for yourself. And then with business services coming back online after the pandemic, it may get lost. So this is something that you don't want to get lost. So bring in some people to help. Start recruiting teams to help you get through this and to help you start implementing this lifestyle into your organization, because it's not going away. This is not something that's going to be swept under the rug. I don't think after 2020, I think is going to be an ongoing pursuit and an ongoing desire for employees.
I agree. And I know you didn't want to say it, but you need to call Kamal to get more information. That's what we need to.
100%. You can call me and reach out to me anytime, and just we can share some ideas.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for being a guest. I definitely want to continue the conversation offline, and then hopefully in the near future online again too. So that would be great.
Thank you for having me, Michael. This has been a lot of fun. I hope some people got something out of it, but I really enjoyed it.
I know they did. We had quite a few people watching, so definitely you can catch it on the replay. We'll be back again next week, the LinkedIn Live lunch hour at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And everybody stay safe and be well and stay healthy and keep doing what you're doing. So thanks, everybody. And Kamal, just hold on for 1 second after we end the broadcast.